Hey guys, welcome to one more episode of Table Salt, our podcast here in Wyoming, Virginia Beach. And today we have a friend, a guest that is a leader and example for us as a mission here in the East Coast of the United States. But please, before you do anything, subscribe our channel. Send this content to a lot of friends and family. This is going to help us to amplify and reach out a lot of people, and then people can see what God is doing in the nation. So just hold on there. We're going to be back very soon. Now. Hey guys, this is so cool. Today I have Kel Steiner with us. He is he is a pioneer in our YWAM all over, and he's gonna tell his story. And he's been in YWAM for a long time, and we became friends. And he was the base director in YWAM Myro Beach in South Carolina. And when we met, and we've been walking. He's coming to our DTSs every year. The kids just love his teachings, the stories, and the testimony of his life is just amazing to see a missionary with such a passion. And we can just learn and just drink from so much. So, Kel, thank you so much for coming today and being part of this.
My pleasure, sir.
Well, tell us a little bit about you. I think people are wondering. Tell about your story, where you're from, how do you get involved with, if you're born a Christian, how do you came to Christ, how you get involved with missions. So just tell us a little bit.
Yes, I'm from New Zealand, born and raised there. My parents were dairy farmers out in the countryside, so no church was there, but there was an interdenominational Sunday school. All the farmers' kids attended there, and the leaders of that Sunday school were very mission-minded and loved the Lord dearly. So as a young kid attending that Sunday school, I grew to love the Lord. And by the time I was 13, I made a public confession of my faith at a town hall in New Zealand with a New Zealand evangelist, Murray Thompson, who was a Maori, one of our native people, beautiful man of God. I remember being down at the altar when he asked people to make a public confession of their faith and weeping before the Lord for my childhood sins, asking God's forgiveness. And I remember a young guy who had been trained to help young people who'd come forwards to counsel them, coming up to me and telling me, don't cry, it's all right. I wanted to tell him, get lost, I'm doing business here with God. And so, when I had got to the end of that, putting things right with God and asking his forgiveness, I remember feeling just like a bird in a cage, and the door had been left open. And I flew out of the cage, and remembering the words of the Lord, don't go back to that place. You're free. So I began to fly. I didn't stay true to my calling through my later teenage years, but returned, in full force by the time I was in my early 20s, went through a missionary training college in New Zealand. And when the graduation of that college was happening, a young man from YWAM came through. His name was Ross Tooley, asking if there was anybody who wanted to join his team that was going to go around Asia for 12 months on an outreach. So that's not bad for an outreach, 12 months.
No. Can imagine.
So two of us put our hands up, and we ended up becoming part of 11 young New Zealanders on that team. And we would spend 3 months in the Philippines. Remember how exciting and how thrilling it was leading young people to Christ and coming out of a country, first world country, where people have their own religion all sorted out, so to speak. So you knock on the door and they immediately for the most part,
Yeah.
don't want to entertain you. That was my experience. So going to the Philippines and having a bunch of tracts to give out. In New Zealand, people didn't want to take them on the streets. You'd try to hand them out, they didn't want them, or you'd find them on the ground afterwards. But these guys were snatching them out of my hands because they wanted them, and very quickly I found I had none left. And I couldn't believe that I'd actually gone to a place that wanted to hear the gospel. Wow. That there was such a place was like heaven to me. Wow. So we got to lead a great many to Jesus. We planted a number of churches. We baptized our new believers. We prayed for children's christenings and all kinds of things that I, as a 20-year-old, would likely not have had the privilege of doing in New Zealand, and I was now doing this as a young missionary on the mission field on my first trip out. So we spent 3 months in the Philippines, then we went 3 months to Thailand doing the same thing. Remember a young man in Thailand, his name was Samai. I happened to just be talking to him last night, actually.
Oh, wow.
He's in Thailand, and I'm here, but that's the advantage of technology these days. But Samai was just a 17, 18-year-old young fellow, and he was looking after 4 jewelry shops. So he would sit cross-legged outside these 4 jewelry shops in Bangkok from 6 at night till 6 in the morning. And I would be coming back from doing evangelism at the high-rise apartments in Bangkok in the evenings. I'd often go past this fellow, took no notice of him, and one particular night, after my translator had left me, I felt that I should go and talk to him, and I thought, oh, goodness, this isn't smart, because I can't speak Thai. I've only been there 3 weeks. I'm quite confident he can't speak any English. But that prompting was so real and so strong that I finally went, and sure enough, he couldn't understand me. But I put my hand out to shake his, and he took my hand and shook mine, and we smiled at each other, and I tried to use hand language to get to tell him, I'll come back tomorrow and bring a translator with me. And maybe, we could go swimming, because I was in a complex that had a nice swimming pool. I thought it might be nice for him, because it's hot Bangkok.
Yeah.
And the next night I went back, hoping that he had understood, but there was another guy there doing the job, and he wasn't there. So I thought, oh, well, I guess it didn't work. And then out from the alleyway, just beside where that inn shop was, he comes walking with a paper bag and opening it for me to look in. So I look in there, and here's a pair of shorts for him to go swimming. So he'd understood completely through the sign language the previous night what we were trying to organize. So he was a young Muslim in Buddhist Thailand. We led that young man to the Lord that night at about 1 or 2 in the morning, and the guy that was doing the job with the rifle over his lap outside the jewelry shops happened to be his father that night. So when Samai arrived home that morning and the father came back from doing the job, he told his dad, I'd been with the foreigners and they shared with me about the true living God, and I gave my life to Jesus. Well, the father picks that gun up and points it in his son's head. And and he ran for his life out of there all the way through the streets in the early mornings of Bangkok, back to where the YWAM place was, where we were. And wept and said, if I didn't know Jesus loved me more than I love my father, I couldn't go through with this.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
That's intense.
So that young man then stayed with us for the rest of the 3 months, and we were teaching him English. When I left Thailand at the end of the 3 months, I gave him to a Norwegian woman. Her name was Anna. She was looking after a Bible bookshop in Thailand. So when I returned back to see how Samai was doing a year or 2 later, he had been, conscripted into the army. So he had to serve 2 years, when he came out of the army, eventually, I happened to be there just as he came out of the army. And he said, Kel, I've been living for Jesus these 2 years in the army. It hasn't been easy. And he said there's a terrible war that's going on in the southern part of Thailand where there's Muslims fighting the government. They want to secede from the Thai government and have their own country. He said, there's no churches down there anywhere. He said, I think God wants me to go down to the hardest place in the country to serve him. So I went through a brief Bible college, married, and went down to this place and started to share the gospel. It's a wonderful story. Some 3 years later, I happened to be back in Bangkok, and so I wanted to make a beeline straight down to Suratani, where he was, to see how he was doing. He had planted 4 churches by that time, and he was riding a push bike, and he had push bike to that village couple of days, push bike to that village couple of days, so he was a circuit riding preacher on a push bike, doing a wonderful job. So anyways, here all the years have passed by, and I was with him maybe 4 years back. He has now planted over 200 churches.
Wow.
And thousands of converts. And that all came from that one little 17, 18-year-old Muslim boy we led to Jesus. You never know what that person you lead to Jesus is capable of doing and what his future is. So the joy of leading people to Jesus is such a profoundly wonderful privilege that he's given to you and I, Founder.
So swimming equals church planning and conversions.
There you go.
Everything started in swimming. And I'm just like amazed to see how creative God is in giving us ideas that who thought about that you will just invite him, being an invitation of come to your complex and just swim and spend time together.
Yeah.
I think relationship is the most amazing thing when you really are intentional about getting to know people.
Yeah.
And listen to their stories and their lives. It's like an open heaven to invitations and to come to Christ. And it's not something forced. It's not something that, there's nothing to offer to him that will convince him. It's love.
Yes.
The only thing you guys have to offer is love. And just, it's amazing to hear those. I love those stories because now we make so many excuses to not go, listen to people, like getting a bike and just bike through villages. We have no idea how that looks like. Because, coming, we don't do those anymore. Now with technology, with our generation, people are on the phone. They want to evangelize on the phone. And nothing wrong with that. But they're missing out the relationship, missing out the relating, sitting, eating together, spending time together. So it's awesome what the testimony and hearing that he's still there. The seed that was planted, you now can see the harvest and you're reaping this joy with him. And you just say that you chat with him last night or something like that. And wow, this is incredible. How did you end up in the United States?
Well, there's a long story to get from there to here.
Yeah, we need to jump.
To continue that first time when I was out with YWAM on that first outreach, we then went for another 3 months into Malaysia. The same thing happened again in Malaysia, where we led a great number of young people to Christ, planted a church. When I was back there most recently, which was now, 4 years ago, so it's not very recent, pre-COVID days, I was with the new pastor of the church that we planted. When we went to that location, it used to be called Port Swettenham. It's now known as Port Klang.
In Malaysia.
In Malaysia. Yeah. They wanted to plant a church there, but they had no members, and it was just the pastor and his wife, and he had 3 people to work with him who yet weren't saved. So the first night when my little YWAM team, it was me and 2 others, preached, we got those 3 saved that he had with him. So we now have 3 members. At the end of 10 days, we had around 40 or 50 young people saved.
Wow.
And this is Muslim Malaysia.
Yeah.
So we continued to visit various other locations. We would do 10 days at a shot where we would be preaching, teaching evangelism in the morning. We would take them out to do evangelism with us. We'd come back, have lunch together, talk about how things went. Then we'd go out in the afternoons. We would do the same thing again, come back in the evening, and people that we had met, we'd invite them to an evangelistic service, and they would come. So they were getting saved left, right, and center. So by the time we left that first little location in Port Klang, we had 50 or more converts in that first church. We came back again because they invited us, hey, come back again, see what more God might do. Well, we led another 50 or 60 more. We ended up with a church of 120 or so.
Wow.
With two 10-day slots of preaching the gospel in Muslim Malaysia. Today, that church, well, the last time I was there, I mentioned earlier, about 4 years ago, that church is now over 10,000 strong. It's the largest church in the country. So you don't know what's going to come out of those little efforts, and this was my first year out with YWAM. Then we did 3 months in Singapore, and I did another 2 months in Sri Lanka. So that was my first outreach with YWAM. I was hooked forever. I went back. I didn't bother going back to New Zealand.
I know the feeling.
Yeah, I couldn't go back to New Zealand. The team disbanded, the 11 New Zealanders, but 2 of us went back to the Philippines, and we then pioneered Youth of the Missions work in the Philippine Islands. Today, the work in the Philippines continues to grow and is wonderful. We shared the gospel from the top to the bottom of the country. Loved the years that we were there. From those years in the Philippines, my wife and I, then we got married. I met Kristen. She had come to do a training school in the Philippines when I was national director there. We got married. We have since had 3 children. They're all grown now, of course, living in Denver, Colorado. We went back to New Zealand for a period of time, and I then became Dean of Missions at a Bible college that I had been student of when I first got involved with YWAM. Also, I was asked if I would direct another mission, so I asked Lauren Cunningham if I could be on leave from YWAM briefly. So that ended up being 3 years directing Asian outreach for New Zealand. Then we re-engaged back with, during that time we continued to be involved in teaching with YWAM schools and so on, but my time and energies were flowing in these other areas, and so it was time to re-engage back full-time with YWAM. We went then to, where did we go? We went to Sweden, actually to Norway for 1 year, and we found out about a large base in Sweden, which was YWAM's largest property in Europe, that was struggling and needed help. And so I was asked if I would come, Kristen and I, to help resurrect that base. So we were there for 6.5 years and saw that base wonderfully turn around. God did a miracle financially and got the thing back on its feet. And ended up being running the most YWAM schools. We ran 11 schools the last year that we were there.
Wow.
So it was really pumping, and we were sending young people all over the place preaching the gospel into what was formerly the Soviet bloc countries that would be Lithuania, Latvia, the Ukraine. I was in and out of Ukraine, which is in great trouble today, as you know. So those years that we were there in in Europe, in the northern part of Europe, was profoundly different from everything else that we'd done for our years in Asia and the Pacific Islands. But it was a joy to be involved in seeing God's kingdom expand in that part of the world as well. So God has got a dream in his heart, and his big heart, that all peoples from all nations And we know that the nations doesn't just mean a geographical place, it's an ethnic group of people, that every one of those are going to be at the marriage supper of the Lamb one day. And
Amen.
and it's our job to make sure that we get the gospel to them.
Yeah.
So that's really my dream going forwards, is getting to the remaining unreached people groups that yet need to hear the gospel for the first time.
So you'd say like you're now this season now it's more into equipping and training and sending, or maybe helping people to be aware of those people groups. What is the season now for you guys?
Yeah, we left Europe to bring our kids to the States, and we were needing for them to have higher education. They wanted to study in English, so that's what brought us to the U.S. So we were in Colorado for a period of several years before we moved down to Myrtle Beach and pioneered the YWAM work in Myrtle Beach for South Carolina. So my life now, yes, has become one of training and encouraging our YWAM bases wherever I am privileged to go, to keep a focus on the field and not a focus on just on the training. So we need to be about the Father's business, and his business is those that yet need to hear the gospel for the first time. Go into all the world and preach the gospel, he says.
Yeah.
So getting into all the world still remains a big challenge to us. And I was down in Colombia just recently in South America. They have 60 unreached people groups, for example, just in Colombia. And they are all in difficult places to get to in the Amazon region. So it requires young men and women who are willing to put their lives at risk, real danger, because that's where the drug lords and whatnot are. And if they capture people, why then they think they may be good for money. They hold them for ransom.
Yeah.
So it's dangerous stuff. But if the gospel is going to get to those people, someone has to risk those possibilities for Jesus and get the gospel to those who stay in darkness and yet have yet to hear the gospel. Of course, we've got large amounts of unreached groups like that in India, which is our biggest challenge today by far in terms of remaining unreached people groups.
I think like as you saying, that's the heart that both me and Anna has. We have the heart to really loving these young people first. It's something that we notice is the lack of this. Really loving them first and helping them to understand how amazing God is, develop this relationship with the Lord for sure. So they can be assured, who God is before they're gonna be there.
Yeah.
But also like they need to be equipped and trained, and they need to be sent out to those places because people are out there, dying without the chance or the hope to know the gospel. And we talk about this. The problem is not the lack of harvest. The harvest is ready, but the laborers, we're lacking laborers.
Yeah.
God has called us to train young people and to be, I think it's a strategic for us to be in Virginia Beach is like a strategic place for training, equipping, but we want to send people out. Like it's the same heart. I think there's so much to be done.
Yeah.
There's so many young people passionate about the Lord. We don't want to fall into the same comfort of the church. Nothing against, I'm not saying anything against American churches. It's the church in general. It's just became a point that people forgot about that there's people out there. There's life outside of this bubble that we live in, and they need to be reached out. So, and I know I read the book, and tell me a little bit about the book before we come to an end here.
Yeah, can they see this?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a book I wrote, which is covering a number of stories that I've been privileged to be a part of, God things that have happened, wonderful, wonderful stories of God breaking into people's lives and changing whole groups of people as a result, and whole areas in nations coming under the sound of the gospel as a result. So it was a joy for me to pen these pages and talk about just a simple young New Zealand guy saying yes to God, and then the results that come as a result of saying yes to God are marvelous. So God is the one who does the miracles, and we are the ones that get to be involved in them if we say yes to Him. So I've found that saying yes to God puts us in a place where we can see God things happen. Well, I often used to think to myself, reading stories of William Carey going into India, for example, or C.T. Studd into to Africa, or Taylor going into China, that the stories were so long ago. Why don't we have some stories about what God's doing now?
Yeah,
So
that's right.
I wrote this book in order for people to have something that's current, what God is doing now, the same wonderful things that He continues to do, because He's never changed. But the people that He meets and introduces and comes into salvation, they get marvelously changed.
Yeah.
They're never the same again.
You're right.
And so the result of that is that the great gospel message has an opportunity for completion to actually happen, to actually get the gospel to every people in the world. It's not supposed to be something that goes on forever and ever. It's supposed to be something we complete somewhere along the way. And this is the challenge to the church, not to leave the job uncompleted.
Yeah.
We got lots more to do.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this is amazing. This is so encouraging to just hear the stories and hear that God is still doing things today. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in with us today, and it's a privilege to have Kel with us today sharing. Again, thank you, Kel, for your testimony. I'm gonna put a link on the description, so people can find this book. Guys, it's worth it. Just get this book, read it. It's gonna inspire you to do amazing things with the Lord. God is still the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow is the same. God bless you guys. We see you next. Bye.